Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 103 of Circle of Fellows. We have a great topic today. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Shell Holtz, SCMP, ABC, IABC Fellow, and moderator of today's panel, which will focus on certification and specifically certification in the communication profession. And we have the appropriate panel for this discussion today. And I am going to ask each of you to go around and introduce yourselves. We'll go clockwise as I see you on the screen to let everyone know who you are and what you do. But also, if you could, tell everyone why you sought certification in the first place. And Brad, we'll start with you.
Okay, Brad Whitworth. I'm coming to you from a beautiful garden setting in Palo Alto, California, where the weather is just magnificent today. And I think I'm a perpetual student. And I think that part of that comes from my dad having been a professor. And I'm not sure that I'm keeping up with him in any way, shape, or form. But when opportunities come around, whether it was working on a master's degree, when it was the accreditation through IABC, when it was certification, when it's some sort of professional development class, I want to do that. And I think the piece that I go by with this is also the certification. Different people have different reasons. You'll hear them all today and we'll discuss it. But for me, it's also to understand what it is that I have not mastered so that I can plan my next round of professional development where I want to go and grow. So it's part of that cycle of continual learning.
Terrific. And I have to say, Brad, when you first came onto the live stream and I saw the background, I assumed it was Zoom until you reached back and did that.
It's real.
Ginger.
Yeah, Ginger Homan. I took it because I wanted to test myself against the standard. So not unlike Brad, I wanted to know, was I operating to the standard? And if not, where did I need to work a little bit more to get there? So that really grounded me in my practice.
Very good. And Zora?
Well, at the time, it was 5 or so years ago, and I was in a leadership role with IABC, and I was on the GCCC, and I thought, well, I can't talk about certification unless I've actually done it. So I took the step and got certified with the SCMP, and I haven't looked back since.
Good. And who are you?
Oh, yes. Zora Artist, based in Melbourne, Australia, and I have a SCMP, GAICD, and a CPM. They're all certifications, obviously, Strategic Communication Management Professional, graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and Certified Practicing Marketer.
And you are coming to us very early this morning from Australia.
Early on a Friday.
Okay. Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Schmieg, SCMP, IABC Fellow. And I'm in Phoenix, Arizona right now, where it's starting to get hot. Every week it's a little bit hotter and hotter. So it's interesting.
I was just talking to somebody who said they're going to Scottsdale, and I said, it's lovely in Scottsdale this time of year. And she said, it's 90.
It's warm. It's warm. But yeah. I got the certification primarily because to support the profession. I always try to think of ways as how can we make our profession better? And the certification program is definitely one of those ways. That was the primary reason. The secondary reason was to support the organization. Like Zora, I was in a leadership role with the organization at the time that I took it. And then the third reason was my own personal reason, is that because I'm adjunct faculty now, and it always looks good to have some more letters behind your name.
There are a lot of professions where having a certification is a requirement in order to get a job in that field. I did some work with an organization that handled the wastewater professionals, the engineers in California, and they can't get a job without the certification from that organization. There is no such requirement in communications or public relations. why have a certification? Why is it a valuable thing for this profession?
Maybe we should back up before we answer that. And we didn't hear from you why you decided to get certified, Shell. So, but let's
Well,
go
that's
all
because there
around.
was nothing that we haven't already heard from all of you. When it comes to my reasons, it was to benchmark myself against the standard that had been established. And like you, Brad, and this, by the way, was the same when I went for my accreditation back in the mid 80s, to find those places where the questions might stymie me or give me pause, lead me to believe that I wasn't 100% sure of the correct answer or the right approach, and guide my future professional development. So that's why I went for it. But why have it at all if you don't need it to get a job? I remember my first department manager, when I got my first job in corporate communications, who, by the way, is an IABC Fellow, refused to get accredited. He said, I do not need letters after my name in order to feel confident that I'm qualified for this job.
That's interesting. I look at it the opposite way around. For me, as a consultant, I've had my own business since 2009. It was really a point of differentiation for my clients to understand that what I do meets a certain standard. So I looked at it. I mean, yes, I did want to test myself against it, but I also found that it really worked out for me in the other way around in pursuing work. There wasn't anybody else in my state who had a similar certification or had been through the rigors of that kind of process.
And I would sort of, I want to say, argue with the premise that it's not required. I think we're inching in that direction, maybe, as a profession. But the thing that sets, I think, the GCCC apart is the fact that when we developed this program from the get-go, one of the goals was to make sure that it got accredited by ISO, the International Standards Organization. And so while we may not have that, oh, you have to have this state license / whatever to be able to practice it, we're inching in that direction. And I think the idea of it's the standard that we've been talking about, but it's also a global standard. And it's not just, any one country, any one state. We're shooting for a much higher thing. So it might actually take us a little longer to get to that universally accepted, universally understood. And that's a matter of time and some numbers.
I think you make a really important point about the global aspect of it, because there are other certifications or accreditations around the world that are run by various professional bodies. But this is the standout one. It is the only one that has the ISO accreditation, and it is the only one that is global. So we can truly say that we do represent the profession at a global level to a global standard. So I think that's a really important point to make.
I'd like to elaborate a little bit on that ISO accreditation and the global standard. What exactly does the International Standards Organization do to ensure that this meets a standard? What is that standard? And by the way, we've thrown out the initialism GCCC twice now without spelling it out. So probably we're saying that is the Global Communication Certification Council, which is an independent organization that is responsible for this. This is an IABC Fellows stream video podcast. And I think it's important to note that this is not something where you need to be an IABC member in order to seek this certification. But why is that ISO standard important?
I currently sit on the council, so I don't mind at least starting that conversation. It's important because ISO has certain requirements in how you certify people. And a lot of that goes to the rigor of the exams. How are the questions developed? When when are the questions replaced? How are they kept current and relevant? That shows for both exams, the CMP and the SCMP, the types of tasks that you do and what the ISO standard does. And it's another group called ANAB that comes in and takes a look to make sure that we're meeting those standards. But they come in and they do, some years they come in person, and some years it's via Zoom and paperwork to make sure that we're actually following the correct process, to make sure that the tests hold the rigor, to make sure that the pass score is the right score, our questions are tested to ensure that they're actually testing against the standard. So what it really means and comes down to is that we have the only 2 exams that meet that type of rigor to prove that they are testing against the global standard.
Right. I think that's an interesting point to make, Ginger. I've been involved in several ISO certifications, not this one, but it does show that your processes and procedures are rigorous and that they're continually followed so that the results can be repeatable. And I think that's a really important piece of this program, because everyone that goes through it, it's the same process. Everyone's being held to the same standard. I think what is interesting, though, is that the ISO doesn't actually cover the content of the questions, which is a wonderful thing that we have so many experts in that area that can help us develop the questions to make sure that everyone lives up to the standards.
Yeah,
And removes hidden bias. Sorry, go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, before coming on the GCCC council, I'd never heard of a job role called psychometrician. And those people are all over this, looking at the processes and making sure that the tests work the right way and work consistently and are testing the right things. And just the idea that if too many people get it right, it's a bad question, and if too many people get it wrong, it's a bad question. And they're always looking at the quality of the product that you're producing and making sure that it is living up to this standard that everybody around the globe goes, oh, ISO, okay, yeah. Whether it's people in this case or the quality of a product that you're manufacturing and selling. So it's good company to be in.
We have a comment that I'll share, which is a good time to mention that if you are watching this in real time, please feel free through the YouTube comments field to share a comment with us. Sharon Hunter says that it is so important from a DEI perspective, non-subjective evaluation. So one of the arguments that I have heard against certification is that most of the professions where there is certification have very rigid and defined ways of doing something. I'll go back to those wastewater engineers. They're just certain ways that you do things and you don't deviate. Communication tends to be one of those fields that employs a lot of creativity and people can come up with entirely new approaches. How do we square that circle with the communication certification?
So deviations as opposed to deviants. I'm trying to find somebody else on the panel to be able to come up with really brilliant answers. So,
well, I mean, think about accounting where you get licensed. I mean, creative accounting usually lands you in jail, right? So
yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, because like the SCMP, Strategic Communication Management Professional, that strategic is a key word. And it is, maybe it's not a linear approach, but there are correct approaches to what you analyze in coming up with a strategic communication solution. You're always going to look at your audience, what you need to accomplish from a business perspective. You're going to look at your key messages. There are quite a few things that are taken into account for every program. And
we haven't talked about taking the test, but it's 100 questions, multiple choice. What I'm sort of contrasting that with other types of accreditation certification programs where if you're really talking about the content itself, sometimes you're being graded on the quality of your answer. And that gets more to that creative writing thing. This is knowing enough about the principles and being able to apply them and answering questions about processes without
Mhm.
having to demonstrate personally that I can turn out the best press release or I can write this beautifully. It's knowing, again, what we were talking about, the process of communication, and not necessarily exhibiting that I personally have turned out award. We've got awards programs that can show how great your work is. This is about, do you understand how you go about doing work?
Yeah, this is about the framework, because your creativity really comes into play on the solution, right? How you're going to approach the audience, the key messages that you're going to develop. But you have to have the framework, the structure to your work if you're actually going to drive change and accomplish those business results.
I also think it's relevant to when you think about the global standard and the 6 key principles. So I'm going to test myself here. Ethics, strategy, analysis, consistency, engagement, and context.
Yeah, there's always one that you
okay, tick. Okay, so when you think about those, you've got those 6 core principles, and I know when I was sitting the SCMP exam, the one principle that stood out to me was ethics. So when it came to making a decision, ethics was the key principle that was my sort of guiding principle that I had in my mind. So there are certain guardrails, I suppose, or those principles that help you make the decision, do the certification examination. I think those are really important, but they also help us guide us in the work that we do. And as Cindy was talking about, there are those core things that are part of how you should approach something from a strategic perspective, but there would also be those things from a much more functional perspective that you should follow. And I think the global standard is what guides us, as opposed to specific, really didactic rules as you would have in the accountancy profession.
For somebody who is considering certification, how would they decide whether they're going to pursue the CMP or the SCMP?
Ooh, I think they should go out on the IABC website and take the career assessment. There's a quiz that you can take. It's a self-evaluation, and you get a report back, and it asks you a lot of questions about, what you're currently doing in your work. And I think that will help you really hone in on which exam you should be taking.
And there are specific suggestions / criteria that when you're applying, they look for a number of years of experience and this, that, and the other. So, there are the tactical implementations, but I think you're right. It's sort of that self-examination first to make sure that you feel you're ready. What was really sort of an interesting one to me was that I just got a call about 3 months ago from someone who'd passed the test, who had been on one of my teams that I managed a few years ago. And I had been encouraging everyone on the team at the time to do accreditation. And she said, I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready. She ended up taking, and she's been working in the profession long enough now. She took the SCMP, and she called up, and she was the first one to tell, you are the reason I did this, Brad. I wanted to keep up with the rest of you, but I couldn't then because I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. Everything was life is working, the job's working, and I could apply myself. And SCMP, the time was right. So I think it's a lot of it is, am I ready?
Mm-hmm.
The communication profession goes through pretty radical change on a pretty consistent basis. I'm thinking of the introduction of email, and then the internet and the web and social media. Right now we're dealing with artificial intelligence. How does this process stay current with current best practices in communication?
Well, we're going through a process right now to update the CMP exam, and ever so many years, both of the exams come due for that. So subject matter experts are being gathered, and they'll look at, I referenced earlier, the job task analysis, which is another way to figure out which exam to take. And it's in the back of the handbook. that you can download off the GCCC website. But they'll take a look at that and see, are they still valid? Have AI is going to come into the make some changes there to the exam. So that's one of the rigors of being accredited, is that those updates have to happen to stay relevant. And as soon as we get done updating that one, it'll be time to do the SCMP. So you're in a constant cycle.
Great. And I know that when I became an ABC, I was an ABC for as long as I was a member of IABC and never had to do anything to maintain that. That's not the case with the certification. Let's talk about that a little, but also, is that routine among other certifications as opposed to the accreditations that some organizations have?
It definitely is. In my case, I've got 3 certifications, and it is for the company directors. So every year, every 3 years, I have to demonstrate that I've had enough training, or have invested in myself in terms of knowledge. And, so over a 3-year period, so we have a 3-year window to get enough CPD points. And I know in our case with the GCCC, whether it's the CMP or the SCMP, we do that annually. So the requirement to make sure that you're staying current and you're staying up to date with knowledge, I think, is really, really valuable and valid, and that does make a huge difference.
So what's involved in maintaining that sort of, go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, one of the things I like about that maintenance that Zora was talking about is also the sort of the flexibility that's involved. It doesn't require you to get X number of CEU units from something
Continuing
by
education.
doing.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, some places require you to actually rack up certain number of hours in certain categories. We have this more, you need to come up with a cumulative, and I think in some ways, just like we're looking for a well-rounded leader in the communications field, we're looking for someone who, maybe they're spending time entering awards programs, maybe they're judging awards programs, maybe they're writing books, maybe they're reading books. You can get credit for all that and going to professional development events, whether it's on the local level or the international level, for being a speaker. So there's so many paths to being able to stay current that that's one of the nice things about this. I think the other piece that is encouraged, and I'm not sure a lot of people do it, is you can keep track of it all year round. Usually there's a scramble around time that you need to re-up, to like, oh my God, I need to go find all this stuff out. But if you keep track of, what it is you've done and where you're going to have to do that at the time that you, serve, re-register, or prove that you have been doing some of these things. You have to provide perhaps a receipt from having been to a conference and, copy of something that you submitted that you've written. So there's a little bit of bookkeeping involved, and you might want to spread that out throughout the entire year.
Brad, I just did mine a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and it's really not a big deal of work to do it. You have to come up with 40 points. There's many categories, as you mentioned, Brad, and just to say, this is what I did, this is the number of points, and just show a little piece of evidence that you did it is really not very difficult to do. It might take me 45 minutes every year to do. And then I do track it during the year and save all those receipts so that I have them in a box in my file.
Well, let's talk about the test itself for a couple of minutes. And again, I don't think it's wrong to compare it to the ABC, which was the predecessor recognition that was offered through IABC. With the ABC, there was a written component and there was the oral component where you were grilled by a panel. You were given a scenario and had to come up with the solutions that you would implement and present those off pretty much extemporaneously. And one of the things that IABC liked to say about the accreditation that distinguished us from some of our competitor organizations was that it was subjective, that you needed a professional communicator to evaluate it and say, yes, this is the right thing. You couldn't just hire a grader to hold up the right answers and see how many they got right. Now we've gone to 100 questions where somebody can just look down the list and see how many you got right. Why the change, and exactly what do those questions cover?
I think part of, and I was both, I've been through both processes, the ABC and the SCMP. And we did run in, there were cultural issues, but there was also, those hidden biases that we all brought to the table when we were reviewing, and I was a reviewer as well. But there was a huge time commitment from ABCs because you had to have two people grade, and you had to agree exactly on the score before you could post it. And it was very labor intensive. This process allows anybody in the world, and you can do remote proctoring now, so you can take it at home at a time that's convenient for you. And there are no hidden biases involved there. The exam before, the ABC exam, if I remember correctly, you spent all day writing, like up to 8 hours that you were in the seat writing. And most of us in this profession can write our way out of a corner. So I find that the questions on, and I've never taken the CMP exam, but on the SCMP exam, they are very specific and they cover what we do, and there is a right answer in the mix. And as far as what types of tests, I'm going to direct you one more time to the handbook, and one of you may know these off the top of your head, but the domains that Zora mentioned are patient management to the place you are in your career, which is another reason it's important to pick the right exam.
I think you hit upon sort of an interesting part of that, Ginger, too, in that when you took an accreditation exam, because it was such a labor-intensive grading mechanism, not even to mention the labor-intensive aspect of sitting there taking the exam, one is it could only be evaluated by someone who is accredited. So we ran into a bit of a labor shortage. There weren't enough accredited people to be able to do this elaborate review process that you described. And you could take the test and you might not hear for months whether or not you'd passed. And that's sort of not fair to anybody who's going through this process of first putting together an application, and it had to have samples of work, and then sitting for a 4.5 hour exam, sitting for a 4.5+ hour exam, written and oral, and then not knowing what happens. The nice thing that you point out is that when you start answering 100 multiple choice questions, and there are, because we have proven it, right answers and wrong answers. There are some tough questions where you go, God, that one is really close to being right, but isn't quite. But that's why you have multiple choice tests. You can find out sort of within the hour after you've taken it whether or not you've passed. You'll get some sort of a quick notification. I think we promised results a little bit like within a week or something. But I actually hosted an SCMP exam in my home during COVID for someone who sat like over there taking the test. And before he packed up his goods and left, he found out that he passed. So that sort of instant gratification and knowing that you're meeting that global standard is, I think, a positive change. And I also think it may reflect the way our profession is going too. We don't have to prove that we know how to write. That's going to come in other ways, shape or form. And we don't have to prove that we can, do something in 4.5 hours. In fact, one of the nice things, if there is a nice thing about the certification process, is that you sit for an exam. I think there's a 3-hour time limit, but a lot of people are done in an hour, hour and a half. There isn't quite that, oh my God, time management, I've got to write this thing, deadline pressure that we're used to on the job that you don't necessarily need to test for in certification.
So you've decided to pursue the certification. Can you prepare? I remember under accreditation, there were all kinds of ways that you could prepare for the accreditation exam. Can you get yourself ready? Are there study guides and study groups and other avenues of getting yourself set?
There are. It's interesting. I remember when I did it, it was one of those things where you said, well, it's not like this coursework per se that you're doing and then you're being tested at the end of the coursework. So you can't go back and just read everything and, prepare in that way. So there are, Ginger has referred to the job task analysis, and I found what was really useful was going back to that job task analysis and thinking to myself, okay, where do I think I have gaps in my knowledge? And then really focus on those particular areas to look at how am I going to close the gap? Who are the experts? What do I need to read up on? All that sort of stuff. But now there are, we have got the primer that was produced a couple of years ago, I think, and I think quite a few of you have contributed to that book, which is a fabulous book to go back and refer to and read up. But there's also study groups that are put together either at chapter level or regional level to help people get ready for the exam, which I think is really fantastic. But with the SCMP, I do say that when you get to a certain point in your career, you are looking at what's your judgment, what's your decision making like. So that's not something that you can study for. That's something that you have by that stage, I think.
You've gained the experience or you haven't.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the certification itself. It's been around for a few years now. How's it going? How many people are certified?
In total, we have just shy of 400. But I want to tack on something to Zora's response about studying. There's also sample questions in the back of that handbook. So when you download that, you'll be able to get a feel for the types of questions that will be asked and what percentage fall on each exam for the different areas that you'll be tested on. So you'll know, oh, this is 10% of the exam or this is 24%. So it gives you a feel for where you really need to feel comfortable before taking it. But yeah, just short of 400 certificants for the SCMP. And the largest concentrations are in Canada, the US, and Australia, in that order. So, some of us can work harder to beat the Canadians. That's not a bad thing.
And those people who have gotten certified, to it?
You cut out, Shell.
Yeah.
Oh, am I back?
You are.
Okay. I'm just wondering, we have surveyed people who have taken the certification. What have we heard from them?
Well, one of the studies that was done by a professor in Australia a couple of years back, one of the things that I liked best about that was we found out why it is that people went out and actually pursued this. And they came into three big buckets. The first was that people wanted the credential. We've sort of talked about extra letters at the end of your name is important some places, and maybe not every place buys into that. The other part that came really close to that is forget the actual letters that are there, is the credibility. Just knowing that somebody is certified as opposed to somebody who's not certified, you do have that credibility, let alone the papers to prove it. And then the third one that I thought was probably the most interesting, and I think we've all bumped up against it in our discussions too, is confidence. We're all trying to find out where it is that we can grow, where are we not totally comfortable with our game, know where we need to up things, and to use this as an opportunity to be able to grow, to learn, and to prove to the world and to yourself that you have, met that standard around the world for that particular topic. I was also going to mention that in this whole study realm, that one of the things that I found to be sort of encouraging and makes an effort like this even worthwhile, Anna Willey has been going through and tying each one of our IABC Circle of Fellows webcasts to one of the topics that's covered in the certification exams. So if you really say, oh, I need to learn ethics, we have a list of all the circle discussions around the topic of ethics. So we are a great, one way to pick up a little bit of study on your own, where you don't have to meet with a group. You can just sort of bone up and spend a few more hours with some fellows.
And we seem to have lost Zora.
Well, hopefully she'll be right back. I want to tag on, if it's okay, Shell, to what Brad was saying. In addition to the study he's talking about that was done just a few years ago, there was one done last year of people who are and aren't certified to see how they view certification. And what that study showed is that people who have been certified feel like it gave them a boost to their personal brand, more credibility at work, and amongst their peers. So they found it was beneficial to have, and that it was
We lost you there for a minute, Ginger, but
well, it was all great stuff.
Sure. Also, how hard is this exam? What do we know about the pass rates? Do a lot of people not earn the certification?
I think Ginger has the best numbers, but it's pretty darn high.
It's 70% pass for the CMP, and for the SCMP, it's 98%, which I think a lot of, and I have heard that the I don't think it's necessarily tougher than the SCMP, but I don't think somebody who is operating at the strategic level and managing groups and teams could necessarily pass it either, because it's really about what you're doing in your job at that time. But with the SCMP, I think that pass rate goes a lot to the fact that it really is testing how you operate and the framework that you're using. Do you know how to manage a team? Do you know how to give strategic advice?
And are people going through the renewal process as well, or do they get the certification, say, well, I've ticked off that box and don't need to go through that every year?
Yeah, we actually have a really high renewal rate of 85%, which is considered high in the industry. And I think that goes to this is a group of people who want to stay relevant in their careers.
I'd like to.
That we should mention,
go ahead, Brad.
The other thing we should mention is, if you look at certification, not just in the communications field, but in sort of certification in general, that there have been a lot of studies done that show that, it can help if you are in an interviewing process and you're certified and somebody else is. The X number of times more often the certified person will get called in for an interview. They have shown that you are more likely to get, compared to peers, promotions if you're certified and somebody isn't. You're also paid more money than sometimes the people who are not certified. So they're, that's across everything from probably accountants to the, wastewater people that you were talking about, sort of all fields. We're going to try to come up with over time the same statistics that relate to communications, but probably a little bit early still to come up with things that are extraordinarily meaningful at this point. But I think if every other profession says, here's some of the things you can count on, it's going to happen for us as well.
And Zora, glad to see you're back on your phone this time.
I am back.
Good, because you shared thing as we were preparing for this panel that I thought was fascinating. It came from somebody I've been following for years and have a lot of respect for, Stephen Waddington, who is involved with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK. And I think what he wrote, and Zora, what you shared, helps us pivot this conversation from the value of certification for the individual and what's involved for the individual to the benefits of certification for the profession. And I don't know if you have that in front of you, Zora. I do, so I can read it if you don't have it.
I don't have it in front of me, but it was from an author. It was Stephen did a post because he's doing his PhD looking at the profession, but it was from an author who there were two of them who studied how does public relations reflect on itself in terms of what do people within the profession call themselves, what are they called by others from adjacent professions, and what are they how does the trade refer to them? So I thought that was really interesting, and the paragraph that you have in front of you I thought was really telling.
What it says is public relations people keep talking about the need to be taken seriously by businesses, business leaders, and policymakers or dominant coalitions. It seems, however, that we talk about ourselves in the very publications we author meant to advance the field, and professionalize public relations do little to advance it or its people. In short, we call ourselves practitioners to the exclusion of all other terms. Our marketing and advertising colleagues do not do that. We do not recognize ourselves as executives. Our marketing and advertising colleagues do. We talk about being professionals before being leaders. Finally, as a profession, public relations is missing from the marketing and advertising narratives. So my question is, how does certification help address this issue?
Well, I think it demonstrates a professional standard. It also does, it's recognition that you do meet a certain professional standard globally. It also provides a level of confidence and validation that you actually do know your stuff. You are a professional, you're more than a practitioner per se. I think that's really important. So it's a credential, and people within, I'm a marketer originally and have also worked in advertising for 20 years. So when marketing and advertising professionals think about PR, they do look at it as part of the whole. It's one aspect of it. And, you know, to some degree, some pigeonhole it, which I think is a problem. And I think the profession itself, if it keeps using terms like practitioner, is problematic. So getting a certification that's at a global standard, I think, is really important to try and lift that and elevate that and give people that self-confidence that they need.
It's an interesting issue because a profession is defined in a lot of places as an occupation that requires prolonged training and a formal qualification. Mm-hmm. And anybody can hang out a shingle and say, I'm a communicator. So, Cindy, go ahead.
Well, when I was originally talking about why I took the SCMP, it was because of raising the profession. I think that it's important how we talk about who we are and what we do. And having these certifications gives us another way to do that. And as you know, more and more people become accredited, and the awareness of these programs, the certification program, will help raise all of us together rather than thinking just individually about me. Yeah, it gives me an advantage, but it will help us all raise the profession.
I'm reminded of a story that Sia Papagiorgio has shared often. And a number of years ago, a colleague of ours, who was quite an amazing lady, Deb Ganderton, she was the president of the local chapter, IABC Victoria, And Deb, at the time, she was no longer in communications. She was the chief executive of an organisation, and so she had basically climbed that corporate ladder and reached the pinnacle. And she was at the pinnacle of her career, and quite an amazing woman. And she sat the SCMP exam. And when Sia said to her, "Look, why are you doing it? You don't need to. You're already at the top of your game. What's your inspiration for doing it?" And she said, "If we don't respect our profession, why should anybody else?" And I think that's really important. So at that time, she was 62, CEO, and sat the exam, passed the exam, of course. And she's just an inspiration and an incredible woman that did that. And I think that's something that we should think about. So if we don't respect our profession, why should anyone else? So it's also about how we talk about ourselves and how we demonstrate our value.
That's such a great point. Cindy, I'm curious if over the years you've noticed a difference in your students in the way they approach the industry and how they feel about it, while they're preparing for it.
Well, I have a rather unique situation in teaching because I teach for a totally online university. But what I have noticed in the group of students that really understand communications, and there are some that don't, even when they're going into this graduate program, those students, they really you can see a professionalism in their work and in how they approach themselves and their critical thinking ability. Have I seen it change significantly? Not really. But I think it's just because of the university I teach for, and it's a totally online program. I think if I was in a face-to-face program at another school, I think that would be more visible.
Yeah. Okay.
So 400 or so certified communication professionals is great. I mean, it hasn't been around all that long. More would be better. And it would be great if there were enough that people started to recognize it as the characteristic or the symbol of a truly professional communicator. How do we go about doing that? I mean, we're communicators, we're marketers. How do we market this certification, especially outside of IABC? And by the way, let me digress really quickly. How many non-IABC members have been certified? Do we know?
Such a great question. No, I don't know.
Oh, well.
But it was a really great question. No, but and that has to be a major part of our focus is, I'm pretty confident most IABC members have heard of it and understand that we have these certification exams. Clearly, we all haven't taken it. So if everybody who listens to this podcast could take it, that would be great. But we also have to get the message out to the rest of the industry, to the rest of the world. We have a great start. We have we have certified people in 23 countries around the world. So it's an incredible beginning, but
we lost you again there, Ginger, after it's an incredible beginning.
That's good. It is. So anybody else jump in.
I think one of the benefits of this program when it was being designed was that it is, to become an accredited member in the past, you had to be an IABC member. And that was one of the reasons why we said, no, let's not do that. Let's sort of put the profession ahead of the association. And we don't care where you're getting the training. And we've seen some keen interest on the part of some other associations around the world that do not have their own accreditation or certification program. And if you look at the pricing that we have for people taking the exam, there's a price for, I'll say IABC and other related association members, and then non-member rates. So you don't have to be an IABC member. You don't have to, you are encouraged, if you are a member of any professional association, to take this. And so I think what we need to do is see both growth on the IABC side of things, which we're seeing. When I saw the numbers that you were sharing, Ginger, and from Canada and Australia, the US, it's beginning to pick up a little bit of momentum. And what I hope we can do is a couple of years behind that, build up in some other places. Realize too that one of the newest things to be added into the certification package was remote proctoring, because at first the only place you could take the exam was at a site, and the sites usually were at IABC World Conference or a regional conference, maybe in a chapter, but it was very, very focused on that local IABC delivery. Now that we have remote proctoring, the world is open to us, and we need to start coming up with examples and taking our message to a lot of people about why this is in their best interest, in the profession's best interest, in the association's best interest to make sure that we all adhere to a global standard.
I think it's also an amazing opportunity for corporates who are very much interested in talent retention and talent development. Of their teams, to actually consider running the GCCC exams and creating study groups and all that sort of stuff within their corporate communication teams or their comms teams overall. I recall just prior to COVID having a conversation with one of the Fortune 500 companies based out of Australia, and they really wanted to make sure that their team was at that world-class standard. What was it going to take to get them there? And the conversation was about, CMP and SCMP. So how do we do that? How can we make sure that our people are at the best that they can possibly be? And they really wanted to invest in their people and really develop them. So I think that would be an incredible opportunity for business leaders in communication to consider this as one of the pathways to do that.
Well, it raises another interesting question. Have we had any entire communication teams get certified?
I don't think so.
We've had them walking through the process. In fact, you mentioned Sia earlier. Zora, she's doing a pilot study. Sia's doing a pilot study right now where she's working with corporate teams. And she does the career assessment with them at the beginning, and then seeing where each person in the team is falling and what learning opportunities they might want to take advantage of, and actually holding their hand as they go through the certification process. So she's working with two different groups. One is a study group out of the Chicago chapter of IABC, but the other is with a bank out of Bangladesh. And as she'll have both of those hopefully completed for World Conference, so we can take a look at the results of the pilot. But it's a service we want to offer moving forward, sort of a concierge hand-holding, getting you through the process. What study options does your team need to get ready, to prepare, and then actually going through the exams together.
One way that might inspire more people to pursue certification is if they saw that the jobs that they were going after were going instead to people who were certified, that hiring managers showed a marked preference for certified communicators, as did recruiters in terms of the candidates that they put forward to organizations. How do we raise awareness among recruiters and hiring managers who may not be that familiar? I'm the top communications person in my organization. I was hired by somebody whose background is in human resources. So how do we get the word out to people maybe outside our profession, but can still influence who gets the job?
I think it'd be great if every person who's certified, if we took those 400 people and got them to go give a presentation to their local SHRM chapter and start getting in front of those HR professionals to talk about what this certification shows you can do and why they should be looking for those people when they're filling positions. I mean, let's start a grassroots movement. Let's start it today. And I'll go out there and do that. I think it could really make a difference in creating the pull in the marketplace, because I think you're right. That's what ultimately we have to create, that pull.
I will also say that one of the things that we have been talking about, I've been serving on an IABC committee that's looking at governance and structure and finance, and how should the association respond to some of the changing demands that are facing a lot of associations. One of the things that I think will also help us, we have been talking about for the longest time, is I'll call it sharing revenue, because right now, when you apply, you're sort of dealing with IABC at the highest level. And a lot of these efforts that are taking place in the local chapter are very, very grassroots, and there's sort of the what's in it for them aspect. And what we said is it would be really nice if we started to align maybe some financial resources so that some of our leaders go, wow, if we accredit, or put these people through certification, they pass this, we get to see some of the revenue that comes to IABC in general, and sort of a revenue sharing program. So I think we need to sort of, from GCCC side of things and IABC and the chapters, figure out how we can all align exactly what you're talking about, to talk to the outside groups, to make sure they're hiring managers, to make sure that individuals want this as part of their professional development plan. We have not really brought all those pieces together as successfully as we need to for this to catch on fire the way it should and will.
Is there an effort underway at all to introduce this certification to other associations? I mean, I'm a member of PRSA, and they offer the APR, which is an accreditation. But there's no reason that PRSA members couldn't go after certification. Are we talking to any of these organizations?
Actually, yes. Bonnie Caver, who is a past chair, she's past of IABC, sat on the Global Alliance Board of Directors, and in that role has been making contacts and presentations around the world to different associations from other parts, in order to get them familiar with the certification and hopefully to partner with us, because you're right that PRSA has an accreditation program, not unlike our ABC was, but a lot of these associations don't have anything. So come partner with us and we'll provide the exam, and you can offer it as a member benefit. So we're working through, we've even have had signed memos of understanding with a couple of those associations. In Bangladesh.
Great. We've just got a minute or two left, and I'd like to talk for a minute about the GCCC. We've talked about how people can get involved in the certification process. What about the GCCC? Is there a way that, I mean, who's on that board, and how can people get involved there?
Ooh, there's an open call right now. I'll jump in on that one. So if you go out to the IABC website, there is an open call underway now, and we are looking for members for the council. And we would really love to get people from other parts of the industry, people who are not members of IABC involved as well. We've had them in the past sit on the council. We don't currently have one, but we want to grow our connection to other parts of the world and the industry that aren't currently represented on the council. So please apply, and we'll put you to work.
And Brad, I know that you were on the council. How much of a commitment was that?
I served as vice chair, past chair, which is sort of the 3-year rotation that happens in a lot of the IABC programs. There are also ways to come in and serve just as a 2-year member without that 3-year commitment and leadership responsibilities. And it's usually a meeting a month, and most of the meetings have historically been remote. And one of the nicest things is that diversity that you were talking about, Ginger. You know, we had an educator who understood a lot of the academic side of things, and also that whole psychometrician test validation process was right up his alley. So we're looking for people who don't necessarily look like everybody else on the committee, and that's a big strength. And I would encourage it because I think, to me, this organization, GCCC, and the process has just tremendous potential, sort of for individuals, but also for the organization. And as we've been discussing, for the profession, that it'd be nice to get in on the ground floor and be able to say, you know, I was on the committee, I helped make this thing really go from this point to that point. And we need people who've got that energy to take it to the next level.
And that takes us to our time. I want to thank you all for your participation today and let everyone know what's coming up in May on Circle of Fellows. Interestingly, Zora, you mentioned those 6 categories. One of them was ethics, and that is the focus of Circle of Fellows episode 104, set for noon Eastern time on Thursday, May 23rd. The panelists will be George McGrath, Jane Mitchell, and Jennifer Waugh. I am looking forward to that one. It is a hot topic now. I mean, we have talked about ethics on Circle before, but AI was not with us to the extent that it is now. So it is a whole new can of worms. So I hope everyone will join us then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
See you soon.